office. I'm joined by the Lib Dems education spokesman, David Laws. David, thank you for coming in. Nice to see you. Now, you are a Cambridge-educated economist with a first-class degree, so you will not need me to tell you about the difference between deficit and debt. So tell us, under the Lib Dems, when you're in government, when will Britain's state debt stop rising and at what level?
Well, we're hoping that we're going to be able to eliminate the structural deficit over a period of 2 parliaments, essentially, and and therefore halt the increase in debt within the second parliament. And what you've got today...
So what you're saying is certainly not for 4 years. It will carry on rising beyond 4 or 5 years, maybe into years 6, 7, 8?
It depends, as you'll know, on what happens, obviously, to growth. I mean, we are hugely dependent upon whether or not the recovery, which is just slowly getting underway, is firmly grounded or not. If it's not, we won't get those tax rises, the money from people's employment coming through. So the really critical thing, which makes this uncertain, I can't pick out 1 year, is what will happen to the economy.
OK, can you do better than Labour? Because in fairness to the Chancellor, he set out in the budget, he said in 2014-15 we would have a national debt of £1.4 trillion. Can you promise us that you'll do better than that?
We certainly intend to do better, but what we've tried to do today is be honest about how we deliver that, because what we've got from the government is a set of spending plans out to 2014, as you'll know, very, very tight spending plans in some areas, but of course no indication about how these plans will be delivered. So what you've got today in the Lib Dem manifesto, I think uniquely amongst the 3, is actually a set of quite detailed measures to reduce public spending, not just in terms of waste and bureaucracy and paperclips, the things that politicians love to talk about that are all painless, but actually some quite tough choices to stop payments, for example, into the Child Trust Fund, to cut back on tax credits for the rich.
We heard Mr Clegg there say that he was going to be candid, honest. Everything was costed, he said. All those increases and cuts and everything was all built in, except if you read the manifesto, on page 97, there is the mother of all get-outs. It says this: oh, if, by the way, in order to protect fairness, sufficient cuts could not be found, these cuts that you say are there, if they cannot be found, tax rises would be a last resort. You've just given yourself a carte blanche to tax us more.
No, I think what we're trying to do with the public is just be very honest. I mean, at the moment, you know, the context of this is over the last week, we've heard from the Conservative Party, we'll reduce the deficit, we'll ring-fence budgets, 4 different tax cuts. And I think if we treat the public like idiots, they're just going to be turned off by this election. So, yes, we are saying from here on in, spending must bear the brunt of the pain. But as a last resort, we're not making promises on tax that we can't keep. But we think that it's spending that should bear the brunt of these reductions. My
colleague Adam Bolton, our political editor, is in Manchester. He's listening to this. Adam, your thoughts on the manifesto and what Mr Laws has had to say?
Well, Jeff, you were picking holes in some of the money they said they were going to save, but perhaps the Liberal Democrats deserve some credit for at least putting some figures in the back of their manifesto so that we could work out whether they were talking nonsense or not something the 2 other big parties did. But I'm anyway here in tomorrow's Debate City. I'm thinking about that. Now, as I understand it, Mr Laws has been helping Nick Clegg prepare. He's been playing David Cameron in the Liberal Democrats' mock debates. Chris Hoon has been playing Gordon Brown, as one of their colleagues said, not much of a stretch for either of them. I wonder, David Laws, who do you think is the biggest threat to Nick Clegg tomorrow night?
I think it's impossible to say. I think it's impossible to say because, you know, the expectations of Gordon Brown are unbelievably low. He's not a particularly good debater. He's not somebody that connects with the public very easily. So he's starting off, in a sense, with the advantage of people thinking he's going to be terrible. I think David Cameron is an impressive communicator. I think his problem is his message. And, you know, over the last few weeks where I've been supposed to be playing the Tory leader, the entire Tory economic message has changed 180 degrees from austerity to chucking tax breaks and tax cuts around like nobody's business. It's been very difficult to keep up with it. So I think David Cameron's job is going to be to persuade people that he's not just an effective communicator, but he has a message worth communicating. And I think that's where the Tories fall down.
And what do you reckon the advice should be to Nick Clegg? Should he mix it with the other 2 to show that he's their equal, or should he stand back to show that he's not an ordinary politician like the rest of them?
I think what practising on these debates shows is there's a tremendous risk that you end up with the Punch and Judy politics of Prime Minister's questions, and the whole thing is a complete turn-off. And I don't think people will respond well to that. But I do think there are going to be some issues where there are big differences between the parties and where they are going to go head-to-head. And I think the challenge for all of the party leaders is to get some sort of balance between actually being quite tough with their opponents where they need to be and actually not getting down into the dirt so much that people just reach for the on buttons on their TVs right across the country.
And your basic personal view is the fact that these debates are taking place during this election campaign for the first time ever a good thing or a bad thing or a not very significant thing?
I mean, it's surely got to be an enormously good thing that people will hear over, 1.5 hours, the detail of party policies, that leaders will have to respond to each other. And what I've learned from the practice sessions that we've had is actually there is quite a lot of time to explore the strengths and weaknesses of each other's policies, a lot more time than at Prime Minister's questions. And I think that the people who tune in for this, I think a lot of people will know, will come away learning a lot, not just about the individuals who are offering themselves as Prime Minister, but also the policies that they're standing on.
David, let me nip in there, because one of the policies you've been talking about today is splitting the post office, putting Royal Mail in a separate box, if I can put it that way, and selling off half of Royal Mail. Do you know Billy Hayes?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, and I've no doubt that he doesn't like this policy. However, what I'd say to him and people across the country is that governments, Conservative and Labour, have done a damned awful job of running Royal Mail over many years.
Labour wanted to privatise Royal Mail, and it collapsed in a heap. They couldn't get it by the unions. Why will you do better?
Because we're not in hock to the unions. We're doing what we think is right for the country, and we do think that Royal Mail is basically a commercial operation that ought to be operating in the real world, not be hamstrung by having to deliver to political masters. And we think that's distinct from the post office network itself, which clearly does need some sort of support unless we're to have the closure of thousands more post offices.
All right, David Laws, many thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you.
Appreciate it. You're watching Randall and Bolton Unleashed here on Sky News.
Coming up, my biggest mistake. Gordon Brown confesses he was hoodwinked by the banks.